Hello and good evening, and thank you so much for coming. It's a great pleasure to be here at the Biennale, and I'm going to be uh, doing a little talk, not so much music. I just wanted to play a little sort of fanfare because tomorrow is the 4th of July, and the American national holiday. And I've been walking around the Biennale today and looking at all of these ideas of what countries mean and so I'm going to try to stick to the topic of places and nations and light. And I also want to thank Vichy Kuriger for making such a beautiful Biennale that gives you this very provocative and beautiful picture of all of these different ideas about countries and light. Anyway, so I'm going to talk a little bit about, as I said, war and beauty, and a couple of the things that the other polarities. And I'm going to start with a little story about that, which I'm going to tell you. And it's about birds, and it's from an ancient play about birds, and the ancient play is called The Birds. And it's a short story from before the world began, from a time when there was no earth, no land, only air and birds everywhere. Birds making huge patterns in the air. But the thing was, there was no place to land, because there was no land. So they just circled around and around, because this was before the world began. And the sound was deafening, and songbirds were everywhere, billions and billions and billions of birds. And one of these birds was a lark. And one day, her father died. And this was a really big problem, because what should they do with the body? And there was no place to put the body because there was no earth. And finally, the lark had a solution. She decided to bury her father in the back of her own head. And this was the beginning of memory. Because before this, no one could remember a thing. They were just constantly flying in circles, constantly flying in huge circles. The play is by Aristophanes and is called The Birds, and found a little footnote, which is the story of the lark. And I was like, I'm not a Greek playgoer from 2,500 years ago, so I didn't get the reference. What's the reference to the lark? So, in fact, the reference turned out to be an ancient story, which I just told you about the lark who had this problem with. Now I'm going to talk about and show you a couple of images about a couple of projects that I was doing simultaneously. And these, as a multimedia artist, I am often in a situation where I'm working on a couple of very, very unrelated projects. I want to talk about a project that I did in Japan. And this was to work with a Japanese garden designer. The idea, and of course in garden in Japan has really nothing to do with our word garden. So it has nothing to do with the arrangement of plants or something. It's more like think more like Stonehenge. Think more like a designated zone that's almost a ritual zone where you work out your ideas of good and evil. So more like Garden of Eden sort of place. And in a very sort of ritualistic, very symbolic way, but not decorative. So for the most part. So and anyway, I made all of these proposals for a lot of things to do in this garden, and it was like 60 pages about all sorts of electronic things and different kinds of fountains and all of these things, and I didn't hear from them for like maybe 10 months. And then I thought, I'd forgotten about it. And then I got a letter saying, we'd like to do the giant film, we'd like to do all the electronic projects in the garden. I was like, whoa, now here's the problem. As many of you know, you can do a lot of things in Photoshop that you can't do in our actual three-dimensional world. So I had to sort of adapt these works to that. I'm going to show you some of these projects. Actually, first of all, I'll show you a little bit of what this place looked like, because Walkaway, my collaborator, is a national treasure, as they are called in Japan, and someone who does all the royal gardens. But this is a Central Park-sized place that was dug up, and we're in the process now of digging it up and turning it into an opera made of rocks and water. This is Walkaway's vision of how can this be made into that. So here we are preparing this space, this place for that, and everything is exquisitely labeled, and here's a traditional Japanese garden being dug up to make way for this other idea. Here's a film that was made kind of out of thousands of little tiny screens, very, very low-res screens, scattered, and the image would skitter around. And it's on the edge of where the forest and the garden meet, in this sort of like no man's land, one place that we might put, the town dump or something, a place where where the border is ill-defined. Here we are in Pasadena. Kind of quickly look through. You can see a little corner of Pasadena up in the corner. We have these are the billboards that were painted to look Martian. This is one of the first images that was sent from Mars, which is an image composed entirely of sound. This is images of water that were under a bridge, projecting the water that was flowing underneath it. This is a six-sided cube of air. Really is a kind of film that's made of all of these birds that are three-dimensional images that are in this kind of cube of air. Defining a frame is a very important part of how you are to see a Japanese garden. These that inside they were made of other material. They're sort of decoy rocks, so that they would appear to change into other materials. They would start to glow, or they would look like porcelain or coal instead of rocks. I did a number of pieces of music that you listen to as you move through the park, and they were you were guided through these by the four, let's say, sort of feng shui elements that represent north, east, south, and west: the dragon, the tiger, the tortoise, and the phoenix. And so you'll see these little icons as you walk through the park. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about one of the time frame things that NASA was working on, and then after this we'll move right to that question and answer thing, or question and question thing. And it's about a plan that NASA has been working on that has a 5,000-year timeline. And this is a plan to move all the manufacturing off the Earth and put it onto the moon. Now, the Chinese will definitely be the next ones on the moon, but what does this claim actually mean? Now, the international reaction to the claim has been pretty much the same all around. The Russians said, wait a second, we were there first. And the Americans said, no, 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 no. We had the first guys there. And the Italians said, well, we saw it first. So, who owns the moon? Now, not many people know this, but the Russian space program actually started about 150 years ago, back in the mid-19th century, with a man named Nikolai Fedorov, who was a kind of philosopher, a librarian, a wanderer, a thinker. And he wandered around here and there over the steppes of Russia. Now, Fedorov believed that the biggest problem for mankind is death. And if that could be solved, then everything else would be easy. Now, he wrote a book called The Common Task, in which he outlined his plan. Now, the first part of the plan was that each person should resurrect his parents, who would then resurrect his parents, who would then resurrect their parents, and so on, back until the beginning of time. Now, he didn't say how this would actually work, but he did say that the reason we needed to go to space was not because of the overcrowding that would result from everyone who had ever lived living at once, but the reason to go to space was to retrieve the particles from the ancestors' bodies, particles that had drifted off, particles that would be needed to reconstruct the ancestors' bodies.
Now there's a book called Sum, which is Latin for I am, and it pictures 40 different afterlives. And in one of these afterlives, you arrive on these deserted plains, and there are bombed out buildings and machine gun fire, and terrorists waving rifles ride around in mud-covered pickup trucks. The afterlife has become an enormous battleground for religious wars that go on for all eternity. Newcomers are being recruited to boot camps. Small fires burn in the darkness. Now, in another afterlife, you die, and when you arrive, you find that your creators are actually very small and very stupid purple worms. And you have to talk very slowly to them, occasionally draw a picture. Now, when you die, the worms crowd around you, clamoring. What's the answer? Why are we here? Why do we live? Now, of course, since you just died seconds ago, you're very disoriented and you're unable to think of anything to say. But they keep screaming. Why are we here? What are we doing here? Why do we live? And then you notice that quite a few of them are crying. And they're crying because they think that we know the answers, and that they are just too stupid to understand us. And we, the recent arrivals, just lie there blinking. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder where you are.
up above the world, so high, like a diamond in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder where you are. When the blazing sun is gone, when there's nothing to shine upon, twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder where you are.
Oh, thank you. It was so lovely. This is a bit personal, but it's really something I'd love to know. If you could name one of your fears and the way you respond to it when the thought comes.
Well, one of my fears really is that I'm not really here. And I mean, I already know I'm not really here, and that this really is a kind of illusion, dream world that we live in. It's maybe a little late in the evening to mention that. It might make you think of the other things that I've just said in a slightly different way, but I really don't believe that that we're actually here in a certain way. So it's not what I fear; it's what I, in a way, hope for. So I guess that when I have that thought, I try very hard to. And before we ask the last question, I just want to demonstrate what I mean by that, and it is this. Anyway, we're so much smarter than the words we use, you know. We have such incredible antenna of what's going on, and sometimes I think, it's just, I'm in the middle of talking and saying something, and I'm just like, if I have to hear that voice for another 10 seconds, I'm going to shoot myself. Because you can, seem a lot more clever than you really are, and so I try to. And I fear that. I fear being just glib and that's the way it is, and I trust trying to be as much as possible in that place that you actually are, not next week or regretting what you just did and going into the future and planning. And now I'm in the business of regret. I mean, music is so much about 90% of the things that you write about are regrets in a way. It's like I think as Willie Nelson said, 95% of us end up with the wrong person. And that's what makes the jukebox spin. So you just think, well, what if, and in the future, what if? And so I try to be in this one moment that we have, and that this is the only one that I actually happen to sort of half believe in, that feeling. So anyway, we've gone over our time. And so I'm going to thank you all so much for coming. And and thank you, Beecher, for asking me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.